We are engaged at the present time in about a month or a little over a month-long series on the great myths which have a relationship to the esoteric tradition. And we started out with two expressedly and well-known ancient Gnostic myths, namely the Hymn of the Pearl from the Acts of Thomas and the Sophia myth, largely based on Pistis Sophia. And now we are moving on to other myths over later historical times, and that is what we shall do right now. We need to keep in mind, just by way of orienting ourselves amidst these mythic themes, that even the nature, the narratives, and the very language of the great myths changes radically when it comes to the Christian and medieval era. There have been various scholarly speculations about these changes. They don't really concern us a great deal, but let's say the psycho-spiritual milieu, if you may call it that, pronounce it the French way, of the ancient Greco-Roman Egyptian world was very, very different from that of the medieval European and associated world. There has been an immense historical and historico-cultural change. This is not an issue of passing judgment, oh, this one was so much nicer than the next one, because after all, history moves on and brings its own disclosures and its own message as time develops. One possible explanation, and I am not as much in favor of it as I was maybe years and years ago, has to do with the psychohistorical theory of a Swiss scholar, no, not C.G. Jung, this was earlier, but Johann Jakob Bachhofen. And I always loved that name because due to my partially German-speaking background, I know what the name Bachhofen means. It means baking oven. And so some people have felt that Professor Baking Oven's theories were sometimes a little bit half-baked. In any event, nevertheless, in broad outline, I think his overall idea is quite useful, and that indicates that throughout the history of a big cultural unit, such as the Mediterranean world and then Europe attaching itself to it, has a sort of developmental pattern of its own, and that pattern starts out with a closeness to what C.G. Jung came to be called the unconscious, a relationship with the non-rational and certainly non-physical realms of existence. And that as time goes on, then this closeness diminishes and sort of shrinks down to an irreducible minimum. So when we come to a 3rd, 4th, 5th century A.D. now, we can look far and wide for the dear old Greco-Roman gods and goddesses and the nymphs and all the rest of them, and they have disappeared. and instead of that there is a developing, a kind of cooking, if we may use that unpleasant word, new mythological world that is trying to develop. And this one is attached sometimes to in a more overt way, and sometimes in a certainly more covert way to the Christian belief system. Now, last week we already touched one of these with the myth of the Holy Grail, using the example of the Grail hero Parsifal, the Weise Tor, as he's called by Wolfram von Eschenbach in German, the wise fool, because his, as we heard, let's say, his ability to discern the realities of existence is limited, and it takes him quite a while until he gets close to the Grail and then actually becomes the guardian of that particular mystery, which approach perhaps gives a little bit of hope for the rest of us, that we don't all have to be terribly smart and terribly learned and so forth, but that even though we are kind of in certain ways rather stupid, we can work our way out of that and then still do some great things and be an important mythic figure. Now that attitude with variations continues throughout the Middle Ages, and we indicated, I think, or should have, that there is a linkage, albeit a little bit tenuous, between the Grail legendary on the one hand and the Arthurian legendary on the other. Now, the Arthurian legendary, which interestingly enough became extremely important and had a long lifetime in the European Middle Ages, the Arthurian legendary, in terms of its historical connections, such as they are, originated in England. There's a semi-mythical figure going clear back to Roman times, when the Romans were still in charge of many of the British Isles, with a ruler, Arthur, who sometimes is even called the emperor in a Roman fashion, which he certainly was not, and who became the epitome of the power, of the virtues, of the wisdom of knighthood, which became the very important popular mythos at that time. I remember my first encounter with Arthur, well, not the old one, not the Arthur of the early Middle Ages, but in Austria, where I lived for 7.5 years, in the city of Innsbruck, in the glorious province of Tyrol, where I went to school, there is a small palace which belonged to the Habsburg emperors, and where one of them, Maximilian I, who is often called the last knight, Maximilian the Letzte Ritter, is buried. And in the palace there is it's a small palace, there is a round chapel, and in the middle of the round chapel is the catafalque of Maximilian with his image in bronze lying down on top, and around it stand, heaven knows, I don't know how many, but at least 20 or more bigger than life dark bronze statues, which the Tyroleans call the Schwarzen Mandeln, the black men, and these are all mythical and historical figures who have been stated and assumed to have been in some way the ancestors of Maximilian I. And among them there is one that you can't miss if you are looking out. There on the pedestal of that statue is the inscription Arturus. That's all it says, and that is the statue, no doubt idealized of King Arthur of the Britons. Now, King Arthur became sort of the mythical figure of the instructor of wisdom, of knighthood, of valor, of good behavior, which I think that humanity was in need of in just about every age, maybe particularly our own, and therefore was very, very highly regarded. Whether he really was a historical figure, we don't know. In any event, our myth of tonight is connected with and centers upon the court of Arthur and of some of the peoples there, particularly one who has all the adventures because he encounters the Green Knight. And I think I mentioned in our leaflet, curiously enough, I verified the information today, there is a motion picture already playing in several theaters in LA, one of them at the Chinese theater, which I still remember as Grauman's Chinese theater. I think we should give old Sid Grauman a little more honor, he built some beautiful theaters around here. So there is actually running a motion picture right now, which is called The Green Knight. And it is based on this myth, which we shall discuss in a few minutes' time. There was also planned a kind of little more private screening of the movie at my friends, the Philosophical Research Society, but something got into the way and it did not happen, but it may still happen. If it happens, I'll let you know, especially if the movie is good, because in my usual way I didn't go to see it, at least not yet. Excuse me? Yeah, it's called the Green Knight. Which so they left Sir Gawain out, but not for out of the movie. I'm sure he is there. So what I will do tonight is my old method, which has worked quite well throughout the years. I will present individual vignettes, little mini chapters of the story, and then try to interpret them according to the best of my ability. The story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight starts at a magical and somber time of the year, as some of the other Arthurian legends, namely at King Arthur's court in the depth of winter, between Christmas and Epiphany. The calendar was very much counted by the Christian festivals, and at the court of the King Arthur, beginning in that period of time, namely New Year's Eve, which was also always considered a magical time, in that In fact, the time period that was considered the most magical, you may wish to keep that in mind if you want to practice some winter magic, are the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany. Epiphany being the 6th of January. And so in this case, at the court of King Arthur, there appears a peculiar person, and he is none other than the Green Knight. His horse, his face, his weapons, all are green. So he can't get greener. He carries a bough of holly, you know, the magical plant, the English holly, which is very nice to use at Christmas time and associated days. He carries a bough of holly in one hand. He never dismounts his horse as he rides into the hall of King Arthur, and he utters a challenge to the assembled knights of the Round Table to meet him on his own terms, or to be forever disgraced in the eyes of the world. And this is often the kind of challenge that these weird beings who appear at Arthur's court and have. They challenge the knights. So the terms which are stated by the frightful Green Knight are very strange. They are as strange as the Green Knight himself. He says that the knight who is to act as the champion of the king, who will represent the rest of the knights of the Round Table, should take hold of the green axe of the apparition, take his green axe away from him, and then try to cut off the head of the Green Knight with a single stroke. I think the Green Knight also gave permission, well, if you don't think that one of you guys can do it alone, take your brother if you have one. Weird announcement. So in return for this act, on the following New Year's Eve, the same champion will have to go forth from King Arthur's court and go to the north of the country, and there in the depths of the wilderness he would find a place called the Green Chapel. And there the terrible Green Challenger would wait for him, but on that occasion it would have to be he, the human knight, who would offer his neck to the green axe. So I would say that wasn't a very good publicity, good propaganda. You know that when you come then your head will be cut off. But it was uttered nevertheless. Needless to say, this challenge made King Arthur and the merry assembly of his knights more than a little uneasy. It all seemed so unusual, so frightfully irregular to them, unconventional and contrary to the established rules of chivalry. But of course we need to keep in mind that the chivalric, the knightly education of the people who came to King Arthur and sat at his big round table always included the uncanny, the mysterious, the non-human, let's put it that way. Why? Because the people were still aware, I think that it's something to be aware of at that time, that life does not consist just of humans like ourselves and maybe a few animals, but there are borderline beings, spirits, monsters, angels, unusual and peculiar creatures which to get to know and to interact with is part of the training of the knight. Because a knight should be able to handle many kinds of situations, including those that are not of a physical nature. Once again, we need to keep in mind that while Venus and Jupiter and all the rest of the old boys and indeed girls of the Greco-Roman world were no longer around, except maybe in a few old books, the world was very much populated by unusual and weird beings and their doings in the Middle Ages. So finally, nobody is anxious to interact with this monstrous green knight at the round table. But finally, the king himself, Arthur, rises and is about to respond in person, more or less indicating, if my knights don't have what it takes, then I have to do it, in order to save his honor and the honor of his knights. But his nephew, knight of royal blood, Sir Gawain, jumps up and interposes himself between the king and the terrible Green Knight. The Green Knight dismounts from his green horse, takes his huge ancient green axe and hands it to Sir Gawain. And then he bends and readies his own neck for the blow. So he wasn't kidding when he said that his head will have to be cut off right there. So without any defense or evasion whatsoever, it has to be done. Gawain grips the mighty weapon, and after some hesitation he strikes at the Green Knight's head, and with a prodigious stroke cuts off the head from the neck. You might say he's on a, what is this terrible, on a bit of a head trip at the time. Well, I shouldn't have said that one. But anyway, the Green Knight's head rolls to the ground and lays still. Well, at least it doesn't keep jabbering like some heads. So everyone thinks that the Green Knight will now collapse, but he does nothing of the sort. He stands there quite hale and hearty, but without his head. And he then stoops, retrieves the bloody head from the floor, takes his green axe back from the hands of Gawain, and calmly mounts his huge green horse. The head, however, somewhat unusually, moves its lips, the severed head, moves its lips and speaks next New Year at the Green Chapel, he says, and then the monstrous green hand tucks the bleeding severed head under its arm, and the green apparition rides away into the night. So you can see that this could make a pretty good horror movie. I wonder whether the movie is of that kind. So what is the meaning of this? Well, Arthur and his knights, these are the well-intentioned persons aspiring toward the knightly status, knightly virtue. People following their method, their discipline of life. They are not materialistic or in other ways, people of a very limited outlook. They want to become something. They want to become real knight. They want to develop the knightly virtues within them, which will qualify them for the status of and the various activities of knights. And that is an important thing to remember. Speak of knightly virtue and things of that sort. It's sometimes important to remember that the English word virtue is derived from the Latin virtus, which in turn means literally, I'm sorry, all ladies, it means manly strength, virtus. So it really meant, the heroic qualities of a big strong guy in ancient Rome. And so they are there to develop that sort of thing, but certainly not only at the physical level, but in terms of the internal, the spiritual virtues. The Romans and the Greeks had a kind of a nice little scheme whereby they envisioned the psycho-spiritual progression of people. And the first step, first you are a human, obviously. Then you become a hero. That is when you developed enough virtus within yourself. And then after you have become a hero, you become a demigod or goddess, and then a full-fledged goddess. So there was a spiritual development, a ladder was envisioned in that sense. And so some of that survives into the Middle Ages. So here is his story then, that the safe, ordinary ways, even of the fledgling knights at the court, are now done away with. They are having a good time doing everything in an orderly fashion in a school of knighthood. But then something happens. Someone appears, something appears who is different. A spectre, a green apparition, a horrible thing. And his challenge is crazy too. Let's say, to hack off his head with his own weapon, and a year later have it done to one of the knights is, to say the least, highly unusual. It sounds like an insane game. This is not chivalry, this is something else. What we are confronted here with is, we might say, an elemental force of being, the green night of nature, the union of life and death, which is what nature represents. So the green night is the force of life, that is the same as the force of death. Now, Joseph Campbell and Heinrich Zimmer both say that particularly in medieval symbology, green is the color of death. Now we would regard it as the color of life. There is the grass, there is the tree, there are the flowers. But as they point out, the medieval people looked a little bit deeper, you might say, and it is apparently a fact. I've never really contemplated that phenomenon much, that when you have a dead corpse, the corpse will gradually turn green with mold. because that's what's happening. So that's life too, but it's life on a dead body. And so the green night obviously has something to do with death. And other strange beings, the jolly green giant, Pan, the Holy King in English law, these are all green. Let's say the contemplation of the symbols and the reality of death is an important spiritual practice in many places, and certainly was in the Middle Ages also. But from the Middle Ages, medieval Christian Middle Ages, to the height of the Himalayas in Tibet, meditating on the burial grounds, in the charnel houses, in the where some of the bodies are being burnt in the fire, was present everywhere. So somehow the contemplation, the establishing a conscious awareness of the reality of death was always considered very important. I might and certainly should add to it that this confrontation with death, however, is supposed to take place without fear. Elements of that survive, for instance, in the Christian monasteries. I well remember my good teachers, my Cistercian fathers in Hungary, when I went to visit one or the other in his small room, there was always a skull in the room. And that skull was not made out of plastic. First of all, there wasn't any plastic at that time, but it was a real skull. And often the inscription near the skull would say, "Memento mori," remember death. And so let's say the confrontation in various ways with the reality of death was considered a very important aspect of spiritual training. And I might interject also that I think it would be a good idea if by various means some of that awareness would be kindled in our culture. Because intellectually we all agree that we're just as we are all alive now, we're all going to die. And so why not concern ourselves with that mystery and maybe derive a certain amount of meaning from it and be a little more familiar with this mystery of, the mystery of life, which is death. This is a very important issue. So the need for a committed confrontation with the reality, in this case I would say the reality of life and death, seems to be the initial message of the appearance and then the disappearance of the green night. And that is an important issue. But what do Arthur and his knights do when this comes? Well, they recoil. What the heck is this? It is unconventional, it is weird, they say. It is not nice. It is not according to our code, the code of knighthood. It is not the way we were taught. So they almost don't rise to the challenge because they can't accept its unconventionality. But this is the danger of humanity. It's our danger also. Don't let the the conventions, the theory, the rule, the law, society, the niceties keep you confronting the green night. Gnosis does not come that way. We have to remember that if Gnosis is indeed an establishing contact with the other, the non-physical, the non-intellectual, even the non-emotional side of life, then we have to be able to accept that reality in its various aspects. It is the movement into the world of spirit, whether it is done by a Saint Francis of Assisi or Saint John of the Cross or Saint Teresa of Avila or somebody like that, or somebody else, is weird. You know, it is wild, it is weird, it is also deadly and outlandish. Why? Because it is a part of the holy other. If you expect the higher and the inner worlds, with its angels, with its spirits, with its nature spirits, with its demons and so forth, to be just like this one, then why are you interested? You know, you are in this one already. But that's the way we are. We project what is seemingly familiar to us, and where we have a certain latitude to move around, and we don't want to see the other side of it. So there is a double process. Once we seem to win and survive against nature, against death, that's what happens when the Green Knight is there and then he rides off again. I mean, everybody is still alive. But there is a strange other reality that has come into the magic circle of the round table, and the prediction is made, and much more than a prediction, because it's a promise that the Green Knight asks for. Come to the Green Chapel. So the Green Chapel, watch out, for possibly then it is not his head anymore, but your head. So it's a strange, what in Latin we call coincidentia oppositorum, and that is a mystery. But it's not such a terrible, it's not a kind of insoluble mystery, but it's a mysterious circumstance that life and death are real close together. In the Chinese symbology, which sort of since the 60s we are all familiar with, we have the great ancient, it's a symbol of Taoism, symbol of the yin and the yang. And when that is drawn in a sort of artistic way, then you have a circle. The circle is divided in half, but in a kind of wave-like fashion, and in the middle of one side is black or dark, the other side is white or light. And both of them look a little bit like a fish with his eye. And the Taoist says, when the time has come for the change, then the dark begins to turn lighter, and the light begins to turn darker, and they exchange places. but inside of them the round circle is of the opposite color. Now you might say that all sounds very good, but what does it mean? But I think it means that the opposites, the binaries, whatever we wish to call them, the yin and yang qualities, which one of their manifestations being life and death, belong together. They change into each other. They are part of a single reality, but they also have their own separate reality. And this is very important to remember, because in a largely extroverted civilization such as we have, we are always looking outside for everything, both good and bad, both things to be attracted to and things to be afraid of. In such an extroverted society, we lose sight of the relationship of the binaries, of the opposites. Now, if we study some alchemy, whether Western or Eastern, then we get a little more of a feeling for it. But it's important to remember, for instance, that death and life are not necessarily enemies. Now, of course, they are existential states, so we sort of anthropomorphize them when we say that they are not enemies. But they belong together in consciousness. Yes, I'm alive. Yes, there's a time coming when I'm not going to be alive, at least not in the body. And all these various recognitions, and they are important. And if they are engaged in some psychological depth, then things become easier. You know, I think St. Paul the Apostle, who was really a pretty smart old fellow, it was unfortunate that he also had his head cut off. Because while the other apostles were all colonials, you know, Jews from Palestine, Paul was a Roman citizen, so they would not do to him what they did to some of the others, burn them like living torches, and all kinds of lovely stuff like that Nero and these fellows engaged in. But he demanded the right of a Roman citizen. If you're going to kill me, you've got to cut my head off. And I said, all right, we'll do it. And they did. But in any event, the issue being that these two, but the reason I brought him up was because he said at a certain point, he spoke sort of an exalted consciousness, which he apparently quite frequently, and he said, death, where is thy sting? Grave, where is thy victory? So there is a point in the spiritual development where the passing of the body is, it's just another change that we go through. And it is not of as momentously frightening a dimension as it is. I say I've done my preacherish ranting last week, so I'm not going to do it now, but let's say it would be. I'll just put it very, very mildly and soft, you know. It would be very much to our advantage if things could happen in our culture which would diminish and probably ultimately take away from us the fear of death. It would be very, very important and very interesting. But of course it isn't happening. But logically, what is connected with that is not to be so attached to the body of flesh wherein we live. This, you know, this is not me. Yes, I function in it with increasing difficulty owing to my age. I try to put a nice clothes on it because it makes it all look better. But you know, it ain't me. No, the me is something else. And the next question is, where is it? How can we get in touch with it? Well, I think deep reflection, prayer, meditation, the reading of good inspiring literature and performing of inspiring actions brings us closer and closer to that self which is not the physical, so that when the physical goes, well, it's not as big a catastrophe as we may have imagined earlier. And so it is my view, I'm sure there are other students of mythology who look at it differently, it is my view that the initial encounter of the knights and of Sir Gawain with the Green Knight and all of his green stuff that he has with it is a confrontation with the conjunction of life and death in embodied existence. And that confrontation is obviously quite important and could be very useful to most people. Now the tale proceeds, the year passes, and not only that, but the year draws to a close, really close. So in a few weeks' time will be New Year's Day. And we remember what our friend the Green Knight said about New Year's Day. So Gawain says, I promised, I am a man of my word, I got to go. And he prepares to leave to seek out the Green Chapel with the Green Knight. He mounts his horse while the court and the ladies of the court and all the people are all so sad that he's leaving, for they are convinced that he would meet his end. But Sir Gawain himself feels quite cheerful and says, what should I fear? What else can befall a man except that he should meet his destiny? That's a good attitude also. Comes from the point of view of destiny. And so he rides away. Gawain rides north through the wintry wilderness. The countryside is desolate, as you might expect it in cold England, cold British Isles in the middle of winter. And he literally doesn't know where he is going, for the Green Knight has given no real instructions as to how to arrive at the Green Chapel. He asks passers-by, who are few, and they can't give him any directions. No one knows anything about the Green Chapel. What the heck is that? Chapels are not supposed to be green. So he's cold and hungry, and both he and his horse are suffering great privations out in the cold wilderness, and no hope is on the horizon. Finally, on Christmas Eve, well, if anything good is going to happen, it should happen on a Christmas Eve. Gawain finds himself in a deep, dark forest. He knows it is Christmas, but he is also aware that he is without shelter and he is without any hope of being closer to accomplishing his mission. Then he quietly kneels down in the snow and prays to Christ and the Virgin to reveal to him some shelter where he might be saved from the elements, and where he might celebrate the birth of the Savior. Unexpectedly and suddenly he comes upon a mighty castle that is hidden deep in the wilderness. The castle beckons to him with illuminated towers and promises of hope and survival. Incidentally, if you read more of the myths of that period, and especially of the Arthurian cycle, you will almost inevitably find that on the way to the final destination, which is often quite stressful and dangerous and all of that, there's a castle. Parsifal had gotten to a castle, everybody, and in that castle there are people, and they treat you generally well, although they do have some tricks up their sleeve, and you got to watch out for them, and that's pretty much what is happening here. He is quite happy that there is a castle there, and he asks for admittance, because after all he's really in a pretty bad way. So it seems that the whole season is, really very, very dangerous. And he is still afraid. He's not afraid of death, but he's afraid of not meeting his destiny. Because his destiny is what he promised, and he wants to complete that. So now maybe it is so he awaits, and what is the destiny? This is something that might help us to ask ourselves from time to time. Is it our beliefs, our politics? God have mercy, you don't want that to be your destiny. Not our ideas either, and not our values either, not our preconceived notions. And even among the ideas and the values, we need to keep up for us something. It's an important thing not to donate everything that you have inside of you to the society where you live. Or initially, maybe I had a pretty good family and all of that, both immediate and extended. I certainly have nothing against families, but even there you have to remember that you are you, and you are not your family, no matter how good a relationship you may have with your family. So there is this, somehow the attention comes back to the self. Who am I really? What am I really? What is this self that is able to look into the other world, that is able to look into reality? And that is really the important issue. And with that is definitely connected, we might say, our destiny. So, and as far as we know, as far as Gavin knows, this destiny is death. So you know the old saying of the Queen in Alice in Wonderland, off with his head. So that is our destiny, and that's a pretty big step. So still, Gavin is aware that he must meet his destiny as it comes, and initially he was in the wasteland, cold, forbidding country, a frozen land, no happiness, no comfort, no love, no one to shelter him, no one to comfort him, which is also an important thing to remember. because we are, and probably we have found that out, or most of us have over this last strange period of a couple of years or so, the saying that no man, and I dare say no woman, is an island, is a very important one. It is very hard for us to make it too long without some association, without some company. That doesn't mean that we have to develop a herd mentality, because after all, we are not bovines. Moo. We are humans. And one of the very interesting things about the human is that the human is both a spiritual individual and at the same time a social creature. See, that is why no matter how much you strive for the spiritual life and study and do things and whatever, go to meditate, go to temple, go to church and things like that, you have to keep in mind that you also cannot, except for a very, very few people who are made out to be hermits. I never really met one. And I dare say I'm rather glad I didn't meet one, because they are apt to be real dull people, in my estimation, But so the thing is, we have to strive to fulfill our destiny and to fulfill our promises, like Gawain. But we have to do so in the understanding that we also are in need of company. And this is the old idea of community, which, while no doubt it has been often misused like everything else, is still important. There's old Latin saying in the church, extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside of the gathering, outside of the ecclesia, there is no salvation. So these are again opposites that we have to balance against each other. Yeah, we have to make our own decisions. We have to seek our own destiny. But in that seeking, we can also find a good deal of support and help and sustenance in the company, especially of like-minded people. And that is why I think it's a very unfortunate thing well, there are a lot of unfortunate things going on. If I catalogued even half of them, we would be here till the meteor showers cease. But let's say, we need the helpful support of kindred souls. But we also need to remember that we need to walk the road alone, and that merely gathering in bunches of people and with whom we don't really have anything in common, and by having in common I mean deeply inside of us. It doesn't mean that we speak the same language, we have the same skin color, or I don't know, we have the same hair color. No, but so there, it is very useful to now and then have some experiences with our fellow humans, and to try to experience these in some depth. And that is kind of what goes on over here too. So Gawain arrives at the castle. He is welcomed initially by 3 people. A tall man with a dark and somewhat menacing countenance, well, that would put me off a bit, and the wife of the man, who is a very beautiful and charming lady. In all of these castles there is usually one like that. It's to the credit of the medieval war masters, So a charming lady, and finally an imposing older matron. So they welcome him to the castle and tell him that they know the way to the Green Chapel, which is located quite close by in a narrow and forlorn valley, so that he will be able to reach it easily for his appointment on New Year's Day. Thus he is prepared to spend a pleasant period between Christmas and New Year at the castle, enjoying the comforts of a pleasant hospitality. The period between Christmas and New Year, even to the present day, or in the European countries, in Austria and Hungary where I lived, that is always the time for parties. That is the time for getting together. That's the social time. There was, I know in Austria, well, in Hungary it was communists already, and they make people work all the time. But in Austria, every industrial, every large business closed between Christmas and New Year's. So people could be at home, they could be visiting, really having a nice time. And they did too. So this is an important time. And he is there, and so he is prepared to spend a pleasant period there. 3 days before he is scheduled to depart for his appointment, his host departs for a day of hunting, but not before telling Gavin, "I will give you all the great game that falls to me during the hunt, if you in turn promise me that you will give me whatever booty comes to you while you are at your ease in the castle today." So they expect him to pick up some important object, and he's supposed to return that to the owner of the castle. So Gawain agrees, and the lord of the castle sets forth with a considerable retinue for the hunt. Gawain lies in bed at dawn after the departure of the hunters, and lo, whom does he find all of a sudden seated on his bed, gazing at him, but the wife of his host. She had secretly entered his bedchamber and now engaged him in a charming and interesting conversation. Here was poor Gavin in a fine pickle. On the one hand, he was mightily attracted to the seemingly available beautiful lady, and at the other hand, he felt bound by his obligation to his host. So he remained very controlled and meek, and the beautiful lady merely bestowed a helpless and somewhat disappointed kiss on him and departed. Well, okay, it's not all that bad. I mean, that's better than nothing, right? So in the evening, the lord of the manor returned and presented Gawain with a whole number of magnificent animals which fell in the hunt. And poor Gawain, trying to live up to his bargain, merely marched up to the host and gave him a big kiss. This bristly-haired, bearded old guy, I'm sure there must have been a great joy. Since that was all he received during the host's absence. The host laughed most uproariously, and next morning he departed again to hunt. No sooner was he gone, the lady appeared at Gawain's bed, and this time she was far more insistent, and Gawain had a difficult time sticking to his promise. So he took her in his arms and held and comforted, and as the story puts it, assuaged her, so that she rose far more satisfied than the day before, and gave him two mighty big kisses. 2. Huh? 2 is better than 1. So, same as before, the host returned. Poor Gavin timidly went to him and bestowed his bristling countenance 2 kisses. The host laughed laughed more powerfully than before, and on the 3rd and final morning he departed again. And sure enough, Gavin was immediately besieged by the charming presence of the lady. This time she was really insistent, and she questioned him assiduously about his strange behavior, even to the point of asking him point blank if he had given his heart to someone else, and if that was the reason for his refusal to fully enter into a liaison with her. He denied this, and she became more and more exasperated, but developed a new strategy. First, she tried to give Gavin a ring as a token of her love. Gavin became terrified. He knew all about rings. They meant marriage, and that's a grave danger, as we all know, or at least an engagement, and things like that, and he wanted to stay away from such symbols for now. And the lady came up with a really curious gift. She persuaded Gavin to take a small lace girdle off her hips. She took it off her hips, and to keep it in memory of her. What an interesting gift. She persuaded Gavin to take the small lace girdle off her hips and to keep it. The lace girdle was, you guessed it, green. She also said to him, whosoever carries this bit of lace on his person, cannot be harmed. Now that would be nice if true. She also gave him 3 big, magnificent, splendid, glorious kisses. Once again the host returned, but Gavin was resolved not to part with the gift he received. So he merely planted 3 kisses on the cheek of his host and received a small, smelly, useless dead fox in exchange. Now, you don't want to have a smelly dead fox, I'm sure. So the lady was watching all along, and evinced grateful joy regarding the fact that Gavin did not give the green lace girdle to her husband, but that he kept it with him surreptitiously. So Gavin took leave of his hosts and departed with a guide in the direction of the dreaded Green Chapel. So a little bit of interpretation. Now we are, of course, in the midst of the entire troubadour myth of the power of the feminine, of the various tests and temptations regarding the feminine, and the way in which the feminine power can redound to the salvation of the initiate. First the castle, after the wasteland, the refuge. That's fairly easily understood. There is a balance between unpleasant and pleasant. If we can only last out the time of the unpleasant, like the wasteland, then we may deserve the pleasant. Jung would say the path of individuation is not all roses, but it is not all thorns either. Jung was a nice, pleasant gentleman. There is a wasteland and there is a warm castle. Both have to be accepted and dealt with intuition and insight. We should neither be ascetics nor terribly indulgent hedonists, but utilize what arises in life wisely and graciously. Suffering and pleasure are both part of the picture. We must accept both, unlike those detestable Puritans, for instance, with their who pursue happiness, but pleasure makes them feel guilty, while suffering makes them miserable. So those are the psychological aberrations, which certainly don't help. But the big issue is in the experience of the castle is the lady, anima, magic woman. The dark anima is also present, the sort of witchy older woman who sort of hangs around. The lord of the manor is, the Gnostics would call him an archon, a demiurge, nature, world, who wants to take away what we receive. What you got to give me, what you received. He obligates us to do so. He makes us promise laws, commandments, covenants, demiurgic balderdash. The lady has 3 ways in which she approaches Gawain. 2 he rejects, 1 he accepts. So we could speculate about that, but I don't think it would be of very great importance. And possibly it has to do with the more common and conventional ways of relating to people. But he chooses the 3rd one, and that is the one with the green girdle, which is a sort of a sacred fetish connected with what has become the sacred color, green. So the 2nd is not returned to the demiurge. It is retained. It is for something else. It is the great work. It is not for the world. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you, is a biblical saying. Now, Gawain now proceeds to the Green Chapel. The squire who accompanies him warns him to turn back, for no one, he assures him, ever returned after going to that chapel. He advises him to go away, and he promises that he will keep the secret. But Gawain goes on. In the forlorn valley he finds a gloomy vault underground, battered with age, covered with moss, desolate, silent, terrifying. As he goes there, he hears a peculiar noise. It is someone sharpening an axe. Oh, my dear. It is the Green Knight calling out to Gawain, wait. So the two meet, and the terrible execution scene begins. The Green Knight proceeds to smite Gawain's neck for the first time. Gawain shrinks when the axe whistles in the air, and the Green Knight checks his stroke and stops. So he hasn't really cut his neck. The second time he tries, and Gawain stands firm without flinching. Again the Green Knight checks his stroke, stops and says to Gawain, I will deliver the final stroke now, but first take of the cap King Arthur gave you, so that I can catch you in the nick in the proper way. So if he has the cap, then his head would fall into the cap or some crazy thing like that. He lifted the axe for the third time, but he just touched Gawaine's neck and made him bleed slightly. The Green Knight then reveals his true identity. He is really identical with the lord of the castle, and he knew about his wife's doings all the time. He asks for the green girdle back, but when Gawain offers it to him, he refuses to take it. Gawain is thus saved and returns to King Arthur's court, where he tells his story, where all agree that even after they will wear a bit of green lace in commemoration of the event. So a great victory. Well, what can we say finally about that? Yeah. I think what we can say is that when one is on the quest, one is on the path of individuation, one is on the path of Gnosis, there is no turning back. There is temptation to this effect, but one cannot do so. Very important. The encounter with the life-death is terrible, but one can be saved. Salvation lies in the power, in this case, of the anima, of the feminine soul. Only her gift has saved him. It is a plot, a plan. And antagonist and protagonist are really on the same side. The Green Knight knows of the green lace, but to the hero who has kept the gift of the anima, he gives life. So Gawain faces death and receives life. By accepting the challenge of the terrible reality of existence, Gawain is saved, and the entire household of Arthur is thereby enriched. So there is we need to keep in mind, there is a tricky disguise in the story. However, in this magic theme. So what can we say in conclusion? We are all engaged in a peculiar and tricky drama. You know? We don't expect that. We think that everything is going to, as long as we are straight, is going to go straight. But it won't. Why is that so? Because the reality within which we live, the world within which we live, is not straight. It is all messed up. It is all weird. It is all crazy. If that circumstance has escaped you, especially over the last couple of years or so, well, I think that you're either excessively optimistic or just not very observant, you know, because it is that way. You see, we look for our earthly, intellectual, and intellectually related order for things in the process. But the individuation process or the quest for the Green Chapel and things like that, they don't make earthly sense. The sense that they have has to be discovered deeply within yourself. And that is why the extroverted attitude has a lot of trouble with it. So we need to, from time to time, we need to turn back onto ourselves and say, well, why am I experiencing this? How am I experiencing this? How I am supposed to experience this? And that's much, much better than fretting over it, getting excited, getting fearful, or getting angry. None of those things help. None of those things help. You know, I was, when thinking of all of these things, you have to, you have to observe all kinds of rules and things like that, so you'll be safe. I thought to myself, I lived now on Beechwood Drive since 1977. That's quite a long time. During that time, for the first maybe 15 years or maybe first 20 years, there wasn't even a stop sign on this street. So how was I going to be safe crossing Beechwood Drive? You know, it was a task. And finally, I just looked. If nothing was coming, okay. But let's say this is the thing, you know, safety in this world of any kind, emotional safety, intellectual safety, even spiritual safety, are very, very hard to come by. This world is full of danger. But we have got it in us to surmount those dangers and to come to a point of fulfillment, of being saved from the axe in the Green Chapel, and of going on our way as well as we can. But the problem, there are millions of problems, but let's see, one of the great problems is that we are surrounded by people no matter where we are. Maybe if you are on a completely lonely desert island, maybe you wouldn't be there. But on the whole, we are surrounded by people who try to influence us. Why they want to do that, heaven only knows. But it's a powerful human drive. And in trying to influence us, they'll bring up all kinds of things. They try to scare us. They try to make us angry. They try to make us, entice us to make us covetous and all those things. And we have to be able to pull within ourselves and say, am I going to do these things or not? And I think that's especially true of fear. Now on Sundays, you know, we have our little Gnostic church here, and I think a number of times by now I have in my sermonettes there mentioned it, but it's a great truth that I experienced in life. Don't be afraid. The more afraid you are, the more danger you are in. Why that is? Go and ask the angels. Maybe they'll be able to tell you. I can't. But on the whole, you have to rely on your inner self. Don't be afraid, and continue the important path where you have been sent. Similarly, I might say for some of us it's even more important, because you know, we are born with certain psychological traits, and I just wasn't born a scaredy cat. You know, I don't scare easy. I could regale you with the dangers that I have been in, and the bullets that were fired at me at close range, all kinds of things. I was not scared. I was not afraid. And that's why I survived sometimes. So, but there are other dangers, and one of them is that when we are being pushed around, when we are prevented from doing what we want to do, prevented from being what we want to be, when we feel that our fulfillment, the fulfillment of our destiny here on earth is being tampered with, we have a tendency to get angry. And my native people, the Hungarian people, are an irascible people. they get good and mad. Although it usually doesn't last very long, but you better get out of their way when they are really angry. And so that is something we have to watch out for, because once again, it doesn't do any good. But what does the good is if we are like we have promised, we are on that path, we are moving toward that, we are going to find the Green Chapel, and meanwhile we might undergo some interesting experiences in the castle, but even there we'll behave according to an honorable code, and will not take advantage in an unsavory way of opportunities that come our way. And then really in the end we might come to the place where the two halves of the yin and the yang come together, where the conjunctio, where the conjunction of the opposites comes together, where the alchemy is accomplished, and where we haven't lost anything, not even our head, but we have become enriched and given great and marvelous presence, which will continue to lead us further and further toward the greatness, toward the enlightenment and eternal life. And let's hope that that can happen to us, and thank you very much.